you'll find your passion and you'll end up in that area or pursue your passion. It may take a few years. Maybe you want to be a clinical dietitian for a couple of years before you get a master's in public health or an MBA or a master's in informatics or something like that, because you want to get a foundation.
Do you ever have so many questions and no one to ask, so they're just wasting away on Google searches you'll forget about in an hour or so?
We had that same problem, and that's why we created the RD2BE podcast, a resource for dietetic and nutrition students looking for answers that their peers don't have.
We are students Macy and Emily and registered dietitian Carl Barnes. We engage in conversations and learn from RDs.
Join us weekly as we gain insight into the unique journeys of registered dietitians all over the country.
Welcome back to another week of the RD2BE podcast. I'm your registered dietitian host, Carl Barnes. This is our weekly podcast where we sit down with a different registered dietitian each week to highlight the diversity of opportunity in the profession and really dismantle the notion that there's a traditional career path by showcasing just all these awesome different paths that amazing dietitians take. I'm really excited to be sitting down with Marty Yadrick today. He is a accomplished dietitian, accomplished leader in our profession, and really excited to learn more about what you've done, what you've accomplished, and a lot of tidbits and wisdom. So thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Carl.
And I'm Jenna, your RD2BE. So Marty, could you give us a little background into your dietetics journey? Like what made you decide to become an RD, your educational background, and a little bit of what you do now?
Yeah, I became aware of the profession because this is what I usually say is my sister is a dietitian. She's 8 years older than me. And I think that her going that pathway helped me to be aware of the profession as an option. And we went two very different pathways. She was a university professor for 30 years and retired a couple of years ago, whereas I started out more traditionally through an internship in clinical dietetics starting out. But yeah, it's been a fun journey for me. I was a clinical dietitian the first 9 years of my work in the profession, and then started working on an MBA about midway through that because I thought, well, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay a clinical dietitian my whole career. And then that MBA opened up a door for another job back at the university department where I got my internship. It was more of an administrative position in the department doing budgeting and human resources stuff. And then I ended up moving to Los Angeles and getting hired by Computrition, which is the software company I've worked for now for the past 29 years. And so my area of practice is kind of moved into an area called nutrition informatics, which is the use of technology and information in nutrition and dietetics. So, and I've been there for 29 years. So that's kind of a synopsis of my journey.
Yeah, awesome. And so specifically talking about nutrition informatics, it's definitely a rising topic, a rising career field, especially in today's era with technology. And so if say that someone is listening to the podcast right now and they're like, what the heck is informatics? Like, what does that even mean? You kind of gave the little tidbit into informatics of like how it relates to nutrition, but could you go a little bit more in depth about like what you do day to day and how informatics plays a role in it?
Sure. I mean, the whole idea of informatics is using data and technology together so that you're not having to do things by hand or looking things up in a book like we used to have to do back in the 80s and before. And using that information to mine data to make better decisions going forward. So really every single practice area of dietetics, as diverse as it is, we all use informatics in some way, shape, or form. I mean, a clinical dietitian is recording notes in electronic health record. And if they're using NCPT, the nutrition care process terminology, that's informatics related. If you're in community nutrition and you're working in client records, working with your clients, or working as an outpatient dietitian, analyzing a patient's diet using some sort of software program. Certainly if you're in food service management and you're updating costs of the items that you buy, or looking at labor costs, anything like that, you're using some sort of tool to practice in your area of dietetics. So it's really something that all of us touch in one way, shape, or another. The people that more specialize in it, like an area like me, are people that maybe work for software companies where their software automates hospital nutrition departments, or they've even maybe moved on outside of food and nutrition departments to IT departments, and they're now like a clinical analyst working in areas like diet order management, how the diet orders are listed in the electronic health record, things like that. So it's something that we're all doing, but then those people like me and others that are primarily practicing in this area, like, well, basically 100% of what we do is informatics related, because we're always using data or mining data or saving data, analyzing data to do what we do day to day.
Yeah, and so what made you specifically interested in the informatics part of dietetics? Because like you mentioned, your sister did her route with university and she had her unique experience as a dietitian, but what made you decide to carve out your experience as going into the whole data informatics, that realm?
Yeah, well, it was sort of by chance. My partner, we were living in Kansas City where we live now, but he got a job in Los Angeles. He got a job transfer basically to Los Angeles back in 1993. And so I moved to LA without a job at all. And I thought I would try to get maybe a faculty job. I don't have a PhD, but maybe something that would just require a master's, and that went nowhere. And a friend of mine said, why don't you call Ellen Luros, who was a dietitian who founded the company I work for. And within a few weeks I had a job, and I've been there 29 years. So the whole idea of informatics, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but that's the area that I'm in. And when I really got more involved in it was about 2009, when I took this introductory biomedical informatics online course that they call the 10 by 10. And the name just comes from wanting to train 10,000 healthcare professionals on informatics by 10. And I took that course. And then you have the option of taking a final and getting 3 graduate credits from the university that offered it, which in my case was Oregon Health and Science University in Portland. And then I finished that, and they had a graduate certificate program in clinical informatics, biomedical informatics, that was like 21 or 24 credits. So I decided to keep going because I was interested in the coursework, the topics, and I finished that graduate certificate. And then I thought, well, you know what, now I have half a master's in informatics. Why don't you go on for the full master's, which is what I did. So I spent, a couple more years just taking a few classes. Most of it was online, a couple of courses I had to go to Portland for just a few weeks at a time. But and then the Academy created the Nutrition Informatics DPG a few years ago. So I think that's kind of that journey from being in informatics and not realizing it was called that to considering that my primary practice area now after all these years.
Yeah, awesome. And it sounds like it's definitely come full circle, and it seems like you've definitely been one of the founders of that, like kind of at the beginning of when informatics, before it was even realized to be informatics. And so with spending so much time with computrition and seeing it grow over time, have you seen like informatics, have you seen a lot of growth, or just do you see a lot of opportunity in that field with dietetics?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. There's some programs like internships and graduate nutrition programs that will ask me on an annual basis to do a general nutrition informatics presentation so that people understand what that area is all about. And I never cease to be amazed at the things that I hear from the students in those classes. Like there's an internship consortium in Los Angeles that I still do this for. Since COVID, it's been online, but I used to do it in person. And that's a large group of interns because it's several internships put together. There's like 70 interns in this classroom when I talk. And invariably, there are 3 or 4 that have already written their own apps. They've programmed their own apps, and these are people mostly in their early 20s. I just see what some of my colleagues are doing with mobile devices and the expansion of the use of mobile devices in any area of our practice. So it's exciting to see that change. And I'm just amazed at what I learned from people that are, internship age. Of course, you guys grew up with using computers. I mean, ever since you were toddlers, there was some sort of a computer for you to use. So that's a huge advantage. But I think there's unlimited possibilities for people. A lot of the jobs are hospital-based because they deal with electronic health records and that kind of information, but it's not limited to that. I mean, there's some people using Andy, which is the Academy's Health Informatics Infrastructure, an online web portal for recording client or patient visits. They're using that in countries in Africa to keep track of people's intake of things like that, or for food insecurity studies. It's not limited to just hospital stuff. So
yeah, and it sounds like especially that field of dietetics is kind of like the sky's the limit. Like however much you're willing to go into it, you can like really just get that much out of it. And so you did mention that before you made that leap into informatics with dietetics in LA, you were a clinical dietitian for 9 years.
yeah.
And so when you made that transition over from being like a clinical dietitian to informatics, were there any skills or experiences as a clinical dietitian that made it not necessarily easy to transfer into informatics, but were there any takeaway skills that you had being a clinical dietitian that kind of carried over?
I will never regret those years I spent as a clinical dietitian for many, many reasons. And certainly in the job that I have now, I can talk the talk. I mean, I'm not up on every single nutrition aspect, but at least I'm familiar with when people are asking a question, I know what they're talking about. And my even though our company has 16 dietitians as employees, on the sales team that I work with, I'm the only dietitian. So if I'm doing a software demo for dietitians, I can answer pretty much any question that they have. I can relate to if they're talking about a patient going NPO or a pediatric hospital, when they keep track of the amount of leucine that a pediatric patient is getting. I understand it. By contrast, where I've really been at a disadvantage, at least initially, was I was sort of a clinical dietitian, sort of like a food service snob. Like I thought food service was, I wasn't interested in it. It was important. I love to eat, but I wasn't as interested in learning about it. So my undergraduate curriculum choice was called human nutrition, where I took physics and other things like that. And I only had to take one food service related class. And my internship was a completely clinical internship. So I went out of that and into my job years later at Computrition with no practical day in, day out food service related background. And so that was a learning curve for me, just understanding what issuing was. And I mean, I understand the terms, but the clinical dietetics area, I had a day-to-day knowledge of. I can understand it. Whereas the food service area, I really didn't. I feel a lot more competent about it now, but that was really where choices I made back in the late 70s, early 80s were a tiny bit of a disadvantage because it was not more of a generalist program that I was in.
And actually referencing to kind of the well-rounded experience as an undergraduate student, like, getting that food service, community, and clinical experience. When then you saying that you didn't really have a lot of food service, would you advise undergrad and dietetic interns, even though, like, even say that someone just doesn't want to do clinical at all, would you still advise them to at least get do you still think they should have a well-rounded experience and at least have a couple, just a little bit?
I do. Now, I know there are some of my colleagues that feel like that doesn't need to be the case anymore, that you don't have to always start out in clinical, but I've never regretted the knowledge that I've gained and experience in that area. And I mean, the last time I was clinical dietitian was 32 years ago, but I'm still using information now that I gained from that. So I think that at the very least, if your internship, if you're the type of internship you get accepted to has a clinical rotation. I think you're at least get some exposure to that area. Whether or not I'd say, yeah, but definitely go work for a couple of years as a clinical dietitian. I don't know. I think it can't hurt, but if people really feel right away that they're going to be miserable every day at work, I don't want that.
Mhm. It's kind of just figuring out, just kind of getting the definite check off the box, like, okay, I can say that this isn't for me because I've experienced it and I, got at least some exposure to it. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. I mean, I have dietitians I worked with back in the 80s that are still working as clinical dietitians this many decades later, and
Mhm.
they're getting ready to retire now, but I mean, they were perfectly happy with it. So you got to be happy. You don't want to be a person that dreads Monday mornings.
Absolutely.
And I always, people say TGIF, and I'm kind of like, weekends are boring. I'm bored on the weekend. You want to
Well,
enjoy what you do.
and that's good because it honestly kind of shows how interesting informatics is and how interesting your job is, for sure. Because definitely a lot of people think, oh, a dietitian, you're constantly talking to people all the time, or just making meal plans. But a lot of people don't really focus on the tech side, like the whole, and especially in today's era of technology, the untapped side of technology and the dietetics profession.
AI thing, everything that's going to be coming, it's just pretty amazing.
Yeah, and so you kind of alluded a little bit before how the Academy made a DPG for nutrition informatics, and just the whole idea of the Academy in general getting involved with informatics. And so how did you specifically get involved with the Academy through that DPG, or were you involved?
Yeah, it was a long time before that. Actually, the first time I was on the Academy Board of Directors, these two dietitians in the Washington, D.C. area came to the board and said, here's this area of informatics, and the physicians are in it, and nurses are in it, and we're not in it yet. And it's there. We need to become part of these discussions and incorporate informatics practices into everything that we do. And of course, this is when the nutrition care process was being developed, and the terminology was being developed and all that. So that's kind of what put it on the map for me, is these two brilliant dietitians named Lindsay Hoggle and Elaine Ayers came to the board and said, at that time in 2006, they wanted a DPG. And the board felt at that time that, well, informatics crosses over every single area of practice, so it isn't necessarily a unique practice area. Well, that, we just didn't know any better at the time. And so it wasn't until, 3 or 4 years ago that there was actually a nutrition informatics DPG. But as I got involved as a board member of the Academy, working with these two dietitians, Lindsay and Elaine, and all the efforts that they were involved with the Academy related to, like in 2010, the Academy created what was called a high-tech action plan to go along with the High-Tech Act, the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act, that was right around the time of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, like about 2009, right after the recession. The first thing President Obama signed into law was this ARRA, and the High-Tech Act was part of it. So Lindsay and Elaine came to the Academy and said, well, the Academy needs its own high-tech action plan. What are we going to do? And they really helped set the stage for everything the Academy's done related to informatics, which now has resulted in the informatics DPG and a huge involvement in that area, and educational webinars in that area and all that.
Yeah.
So it's been quite an evolution since 2006.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm sure that you've spoken to a lot of nutrition students and a lot of younger dietitians or just dietetic interns, people in that realm of dietetics. And so do you think that RD2BE, that specific realm, do you think that we're accessing all of the Academy's resources that we can be? Because at least I know for me, when it comes to, like, I only found out recently that we do have an informatics DPG. And I also found out recently that a lot of nutrition students don't really take advantage of these DPGs and MIGs. And so do you think that there are other ways that students could get more involved with the?
Well, it is, I mean, absolutely positively be an Academy member. because you then have access to all these resources. And some of the webinars are free of charge, and they're certainly reduced price for members of the Academy. Now, I realize that belonging to a DPG, each one of them is an extra bit of money, which for a student, that can be kind of a burden. So I would say, look at the list of DPGs and member interest groups and see what you think you could afford and that you're most interested in, and join those, because then you'll have access to, a lot of the community of interest, the sort of bulletin boards that are available with questions that people pose and help that people need with things, or ask for suggestions for presentations. Lots of resources like that, not to mention some webinars that either a lot of times are free if you're a member of the DPG, or a certainly reduced price from that of what non-members would be paying. So I think the Academy's resources are really, they're huge, and they're untapped a lot just because people don't dig far enough. But belonging to a DPG in your area of interest is, to me, the best way to get access to the materials that are available, whether they're webinars or other information like that.
Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, there's like 26 DPGs. And so
Yeah,
that's like,
something like that. Yeah.
that's a pretty handful of very specific like niches or niches of dietetics that you probably at least have one connection to as a student.
Yeah, for example, years ago, I think most dietitians get really excited about the concept of sports nutrition. And so at the time, I got involved with the former SCAN DPG, it was called Sports Cardiovascular and Wellness Nutritionist. I was working in cardiac rehab at my clinical dietitian job. So I was the dietitian counseling patients that had heart surgery and heart disease and all that. And our hospital also owned a fitness center out in the suburbs, and I would go out there and do sports nutrition counseling, weight loss counseling for those clients out there. And so I got really involved in the SCAN. It's now two separate DPGs, one that's sports human performance nutrition, and the other is cardiovascular and wellness. But I got involved in the DPG and actually got on the board and was the chair of that DPG back in the mid-90s, even though that little bit of counseling I was doing at the time was my only area of practice in that area. So I guess what I'm getting at is there are areas of dietetics that you want to work in or are working in or plan to work in, and then there are others that you're just really interested in learning more about. There are all sorts of DPGs that I've been members of for years just because I'm interested in the information, not that I'm practicing in that area. So
yeah,
that was sort of a long
no, you're perfectly fine. And actually, so because what you mentioned with kind of the sports nutrition DPG and how you eventually became chair of it, was your motivation to become chair of it because of just like your passion for it, or because you were just interested in it? Or
it was a passionate group of people, and this is another story, like how I sort of fell into it. Okay, so I was working in cardiac rehab, and that was a major area of SCAN. And their symposium in 1985 was in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which is where I grew up. So I'm like, oh, I get to go see my folks and go to the seminar. Well, and at the time, I didn't care whether the seminar, the conference was going to be any good or not so good or whatever. And then I went to this meeting, and it was like, oh my God, where'd all these people come from? They're all highly energetic, motivated, interesting, friendly, outgoing. And it really got me excited about that area. And so every year then I went to that symposium, and I kept going to the leadership saying, hey, I'd really like to get involved. I want to volunteer for something. It took about 3 years of asking before they finally found a job for me to do. And then, you know how that works. You start doing one thing. If you don't screw up too bad, then they ask you to do something else. And then finally they put me on the ballot. So that's kind of how that evolved.
And it's kind of cool just hearing your story and how even like in your professional and also extracurricular with dietetics, how you just kind of fall into it. But would you say that you kind of fell into it because of your passions? Like your passions kind of led you from each thing? Or
I think so. Either directly or indirectly. I mean, obviously, I really care a lot about fitness and eating well. And so SCAN was kind of a perfect fit in that area for me. And back in the 90s, I was I forget what they call, I was part of the Speakers Bureau for Gatorade, talking about hydration. And so I went around giving talks on the importance of hydration to coaches and athletes during that time frame, about a few years back in the 90s. And that was really a lot of fun to do that, because I loved working with athletes, and I loved helping to teach coaches what really works and what doesn't work in terms of proper hydration and all that. So yeah, it was kind of like an area that I thought was fun and interesting, and I cared about, even though I wasn't 100% working as a sports nutrition professional.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great thing that nutrition students can really take away from, just because you don't have to only do clinical, or you only like, like you have to be involved in public health if you want to do public health. Like definitely through the academy and stuff, you can get involved in literally any niche. Just because, like for example, like just because you did the health coaching for sports, you were still able to be chair of the was it SCAN?
It was called SCAN, yeah, sports cardiovascular, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's really just like your passions can lead you anywhere through the academy. And so we did talk a little bit about before, like the leadership positions that you've held, both like in your professional and through the academy. And so were there any unexpected things that you learned regarding leadership or holding these positions that you were able to take away from?
Well, I mean, I started out in my local district dietetic association as like the co-chair of the PR committee. So kind of started out really, really small, and we did some exciting things, like got a billboard on a major freeway about the RD being the nutrition expert. This is back in the mid 80s, late 80s. And we got area mayors and TV celebrities to keep track of their diets for 3-day. We did they did a 3-day intake. We did an analysis. Now, we didn't have software like there is now in hand, but what I'm getting at is it was a great way to start, and it got me more involved at the district level, then the state level, and the DPG level, and then the national level. And it's been a great learning experience for me. One of the things you do learn as a leader, and it's a little hard to accept at first, is that you can't please everybody. And there will always be people that are unhappy and will complain. Or you do a presentation, and like if 5 is high and 1 is low, and you might get all 4s and 5s and then 1, and you wonder, where did I go wrong? Or if you're a leader, like I was on the academy board for several years. I was president back in 08, 09, and you want to do right. You're trying to do the best you can. And there are always going to be people that are not happy with that, but that's just, we're a very large organization and people have different opinions on things. So it kind of helped me. I don't know if I want to say it helped me grow up, but it helped me realize that, I'm okay. I'm working as hard as I can. I'm doing everything I do in good faith and openness and honesty. And if people don't like it, then that's okay.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a good, moving into not older adult, but feeling like an adult. You could accept it. When I was first elected president back in 07, one of the former presidents said to me, you become the chief complaint department. So,
Yeah.
but it's not a bad thing. It helps you grow. It helps you realize that.
Definitely a good learning experience. And like, and what you mentioned with kind of pretty much no matter what you do in a leadership position, there's going to be someone who doesn't like it, or you're going to have to deal with conflicting opinions, and you're going to have to deal with someone just having a negative outlook towards you. And so if someone is in a leadership position, and even like talking, smaller level for a nutrition student that's in an extracurricular leadership position, and they're trying to make a decision, do you have any like tips or advice when it comes to making those big decisions, how to divide between, am I making this decision to please people, or am I making this decision for the betterment of whatever it is that I'm leading?
Yeah, I think it it's hard not to be influenced by people and want to be to please other people and make the group happy or give into a group because you're the minority. But I think it's important that it's important that you base your decisions on all the facts and not on emotion, but that you also listen to your gut, because that you often find truth there. You know what you really think is right or what you want. So I think if you keep all that in mind and you feel like you're doing the right thing, then you can't go wrong. I mean, you may be overruled on something. You may make a decision that you regret temporarily, but then you realize that you grew and you learned, or you found out that this particular thing wasn't really what you thought all those years that you might want to do. So there's a lot of thoughts like that I think that can help you move on from one decision or make the right decision in the first place, or feel free to disagree with colleagues about something that's being done in an adult way.
Yeah, definitely big emphasis on the adult way, because you kind of can't really be like, oh, you're wrong, I don't like what you said, and then you can't really move on. But
Yeah, and it's social media has kind of brought out the worst in some people, because when we're driving in a car and the windows are rolled up and you're mad at someone and you're cussing them out, they can't hear you. You're just mad because they turned in front of you or whatever. Most people would probably never say those things to them if they thought the other person can hear them. So a lot of people sort of hide behind social media, even though your social media name or identity is there, because you're not physically there saying it to them. People think that they can, I don't know, people are just they're a lot more blunt, sarcastic, and destructive in some ways in social media. So we need to try to be better than that. I think there's ways to do it. You can disagree and be gracious about it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I definitely think with how things have been when it comes to having disagreements, I do feel like it's kind of turned to a social faux pas to openly disagree with someone, because just with how disagreements have been seen now, like it seems just like it's always aggressive, it's always negative, but really sometimes disagreement is what helps you move forward to the best thing, because because sometimes you have to outwardly disagree with someone to be able to talk about it and be able to do the best for extracurricular any job position that you hold.
And there are ways to disagree appropriately. I mean, just you state why you disagree. You're disagreeing with the idea. You're not disagreeing with the goodness of the person. You're not swearing at them. You're not calling him an idiot. Things that we've heard over the last few years on national TV, things like that. There are ways to do it that are productive and not counterproductive.
And I do feel like, especially with nutrition students, speaking up sometimes can be it can be daunting, or what's the word? It's kind of like stressful or intimidating. It can be a little intimidating to speak up about certain things. And it can also just be intimidating to reach out to certain people if just honestly intimidating, kind of being the one to put the foot forward with anything, whether it's something that you genuinely doesn't sit right with you that you want to talk about, or even just you knowing that you genuinely want to do something, but you're just too afraid to put yourself out there. And so do you have any advice for nutrition students when it comes to putting that first foot forward and kind of just taking that leap of faith, even if it's kind of a little bit of a leap into the unknown, as to how to get rid of those negative thoughts or things towards whether it's like a disagreement or making a decision that is a little risky, but like what might be on that other end,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on what it is that you're saying or doing or having concerns about. I mean, if we always want to make sure that we're based in disagreement, we want to make sure that we're basing everything we say on actual evidence. There are a lot of people in our profession, maybe not a lot, but there's a small percentage of people in our profession that don't necessarily practice based on real evidence. they jump on whatever is the latest bandwagon, and it's kind of bringing the rest of us down by their focusing on something that is not really proven with evidence. But I mean, it just depends on the situation that you're in. It's okay to say, will you help me understand your thoughts on this or your position on this better? Or here are my concerns. What do you think about that? Have I been misinformed, or help me understand this better? Really, just, I mean, there are all sorts of situations we could apply to those questions that you asked, but I think just if we just approach it in wanting to learn, if you're not an expert in an area, it's okay to admit that and asking another person for help. You may disagree with them, and there's a polite way to do that. So I don't know if it really answered your question.
Oh no, yeah, because it's mainly,
A lot of different ways with
yeah,
that.
you're perfectly fine, because it's mainly just the aspect of a lot of, I mean, just a lot of students in general, because of where they are in their professional journey, and this kind of applies to any job or anything. As a student, we kind of feel like, oh, the confidence definitely goes down a couple notches, because it's like, I'm only a student, I'm still learning, I don't know how much I do know, I don't know how much is in my place to reach out or to do these sorts of things. And so definitely you mentioning the aspect of it's all a learning experience, no matter what it is. Like, you could be a student, you could be 20 years into the profession,
Oh yeah.
everything is a learning experience no matter what, but it kind of depends on your mindset towards it, for sure. And it's just kind of not changing that mindset, whether you're a student, a professional, or anything like
Right,
that.
right. And hopefully the preceptors that the students have in their internship programs have the right attitude about everything, that they are evidence-based, that they are want the students to learn. And I mean, there are a lot of really wonderful preceptors out there. You see people getting Preceptor of the Year awards and things like that. I want everyone that's in that kind of a role to be nurturing to students and help
For sure.
them along. I mean, that's why we're doing what we do.
Yeah. And especially during dietetic internships, that's probably one of the most stressful times as an undergraduate student, and right before the RD exam, because not only are you going into a completely new work setting, but also whatever preceptor you have pretty much is going to set the tone for how your rotation is going to be.
Yeah.
And because just they're the ones teaching you in that rotation, and you kind of really have to go with the flow with pretty much everything. And I know, and you probably know, with nutrition students, we're all type A. We like things organized in a specific way. And if it doesn't go that specific way, we will go insane. And so when it comes to that flexibility and stuff as well, like, and I'm sure with the leadership positions that you've held, there have been things thrown at you that you've just been like, I wasn't expected, or you had to respond a certain way just on the whim. And so if you've had those experiences, did you learn anything from it, or do you have any advice that you would give nutrition students about being flexible, being adaptable, and kind of not necessarily escaping that type A mindset, but kind of being able to be more flexible with it?
Yeah. Oh, wow. There's so many different ways I could answer that. It's a very broad. I was a media spokesperson for the Academy for about 7 years, and I'll freely admit the one thing I was not that good at was sound bites, putting it all in a sound bite, a brief sound bite. If I was asked a question, and so that was really a skill that I admired in a lot of my other colleagues. There are situations where, or as a leader in a leadership role, if I presented at a state meeting, the Academy presidents, sometimes presidents will often be invited to state annual meetings to give some sort of a presentation. It's usually this what's called the Academy update presentation, and about all the benefits of being an Academy member and all that. And I had people challenge me on some things that I might not have been quite as prepared for, like the Academy's industry relationships. This was even before they had the sponsorship guidelines. So as a leader, you want to try to be prepared for any sort of question you might be asked.
Yeah.
Again,
So I guess it's really just preparing for what you can, but then also just being open. Because again, it's kind of bringing back in the learning experience aspect that we were talking about. Just if you keep everything with an open mind and open learning experience, you'll take the good from it, you'll go through the
right.
bad, and then next
Well,
rotation.
the other thing too is it's important to understand that it's okay to say I don't know.
Mhm.
Even when I was on a media interview, if there was something that I was asked about a certain area, don't try to fake it and come up with
Oh,
some sort of jumbled answer. Just say it's not an area that I know as much about, or let me just get right back to you. Like if I was working with a reporter on a printed media story, then I could just get back to them with other information later.
mhm.
But whatever it is, it's okay to say I don't know the answer to that, but
Mhm.
I can find out, or I can get you to the person that's an expert in that area. Like I have people coming to me all the time just because of my role in the academy leadership. And they'll ask me anything and everything, whatever it is, whether it's May 15th and I need 20 more CPEU credits before the 31st, the end of the year. What do I always, because of all my involvement in leadership roles over the year, I know who to send them to, or I know who I can ask the answer.
Mhm.
So if you don't know, it's okay. And going to find the right person or the right resource to get the answer is the way to go.
Yeah, and I definitely think dietetic internships kind of have that perfect platform of, I mean, you'd much rather, especially in the learning stage, it's honestly expected for you in some situations to say, I don't know, because I feel like if a preceptor had a student or an intern that knew everything and anything under the sun, that would be an anomaly more than anything.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so when it comes to RD2Bs and like whether they're a dietetic intern, an undergrad student, they're just in school or they're about to take the RD exam, is there one thing that you would want an RD to be to know just about the profession, or just there was something that you wish you knew when you were going through the process that you would have wanted to know?
Well, I think the first thought that comes to my mind, it is probably the most diverse profession there is of any profession at all. It's the most diverse, the variety of career paths that people could take. And it's not just those 6 or 7 practice areas that we've always heard about forever and ever and ever.
Mhm.
And that being said, my thought is you'll find your passion and you'll end up in that area, or pursue your passion. It may take a few years. Maybe you want to be a clinical dietitian for a couple of years before you get a master's in public health or an MBA or a master's in informatics or something like that, because you want to get a foundation.
Mhm.
But find your passion and make a plan to get there.
Yeah, and I think those are really good words to go by, even starting just as a freshman in undergrad and moving all the way to the RD exam. So thank you so much for being here today with us, Marty. It was wonderful hearing about your transition from being a clinical dietitian all the way to informatics and to what you've done with the academy. So thank you just for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.